Hi. Well, it is August 4th. It's good to be here, and we are down to it. All of these preparations over the years, as we've been reading about the coming destruction of Judah, are finally about to take place. And I guess as I was reading today, the first thought that came to my mind was preaching can be hazardous to your health. And in the case of Jeremiah, he had been at it for 23 years and preaching this message about the coming destruction and judgment if the people did not turn. But we've now reached the point where Josiah, as Heather talked about, made a poor decision. For some reason decides he's going out to do battle with Necho, who's coming up from Egypt. As it turns out, he dies. And we have these sons who now take power. One doesn't last long at all. Egypt takes him off, Jehoahaz, back to Egypt. He ends up dying there. Jehoiakim ends up taking over and is merely really a puppet for Egypt. Egypt demands great taxes on the people of Judah, and so Jehoiakim's job really is to collect those. And in the midst of it, what Jehoiakim's really mostly interested in is building his fancy palace. So we have a king who does not follow God's ways, who is basically beholden to Egypt for his power, and basically just wants to spend his time building his palace. Something happens, though, 4 years into his reign, and it's really in 605. It's 7 years before the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar really come into Judah and begin that deportation of people and the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem. So we're at 605. We're 7 years before that invasion, and we're 4 years into Jehoiakim's rule, and something happens. At the Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, also called Chaldeans, defeat Pharaoh Necho of Egypt and decimate his army. So now we have a case where the one who is propping up Jehoiakim and Judah is no longer able to help out. And with that, God's sword at this point, this pagan king Nebuchadnezzar, is ready to march on Judah. Jeremiah has been preaching for 23 years, and now his message gets more pointed. God says, go out in the streets, tell them face to face, and lay it out for them. And that's exactly what Jeremiah does, as he's always done. And interestingly, he really says, he gives them timeline of how things are to happen. But more importantly, it's not meant to just be an objective timeline. It's really meant to say, it's going to be miserable. This is what God has promised he would do. If you didn't repent and turn to him, you haven't, and therefore it's here. And now, if you look at history books, they will say Nebuchadnezzar rose to power. And then not only did he defeat Necho, he then defeated many other countries, including Judah. From a godly perspective, what Jeremiah tells them is God is going to use a pagan king to execute his judgment on his people Judah. And God also says through Jeremiah that 70 years from now, God's going to execute his judgment on this pagan king. God is the one whose hand is in everything and who is executing things according to his plan. That 70 years, I think, is significant because what God through Jeremiah is saying is, all of us who go into exile, this is going to be an entire generation. Ultimately, the generation who returns from that exile will not have known the days before here of being in Judah. It's going to be an entirely new group, and we'll find out about that as Ezra and Nehemiah are involved in leading the people back at that point. So, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So you have this situation where Jeremiah is told to preach. We're within a few years of things happening, and he's telling them exactly what's going to happen. And clearly, the priests and prophets are not happy about that. They want to kill Jeremiah. And a couple of interesting bits here that I'll leave you with are, there was another prophet that's spoken about, Uriah or Urijah, depending on the spelling. Not much is known about him, but he was preaching the same message, it said. What's interesting is that when things got bad and Jehoiakim had enough of him, it says Uriah became fearful and fled to Egypt. And so on one hand, unlike Jeremiah, Uriah becomes scared and runs. On the other hand, what it also shows is Jehoiakim is so bent on getting rid of dissent that he sends people after him and brings him back to have him killed. Jeremiah, on the other hand, already knowing this, stands there and says, this is the way it is, and when they threaten him, he says, do what you will with me. The issue is between you and God, not me. And it really, I think, says something and speaks to Jeremiah's character at this point. And another voice is heard, Ahikam, who comes to Jeremiah's rescue, to his aid. And what it says, Ahikam has been through the wars. He's been a part of the process for many years as an elder. He speaks with wisdom, and I think sometimes that's why we want to listen to those who are older. They have seen history play out. They can remember, and therefore he speaks about Micah and Micah's prophecy and how it came true, and how important it is that as the people at that time turned under Hezekiah, that the same thing might be true here, that we should listen and repent, otherwise destruction will be upon us. And at that point, Jeremiah basically is set free, and we now move on, and basically we're going to move into what ultimately has been predicted, Babylon coming in and destroying Judah, and ultimately in 587 breaching the walls of Jerusalem, and the people being carried off into exile into the north, into Babylon. And there they will be for an entire generation, actually longer than a generation. And the wrath that God had promised is about to take place. And so Jeremiah's focus at this point is now going to turn forward into those lands and those kings who surrounded Judah and really were enemies, always have been, of God. So we'll look forward to that. Should be interesting. But I think my takeaway today is, God gives us a message, and we speak that message, and we need not be fearful. We need to trust in Him and know that we are faithful. And you know what? Our calling in this life may not be pleasant. Jeremiah here is not giving good news, and he's not only is it not good news, but it's good news that it's bad news he's having to give to his family and friends, and that makes it even harder. And I need to know that when I need to do that, I need to be strong and trust in the Lord and not shirk my duty, because in the end, if that is God's plan for me, I want to follow through on it. But today, the good news is that God is in control. We can't see it from our perspective, but everything executes according to His plan. And He's kind of laid out the plan for us, so we know how it ends. And that's good news for today. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.